Welcome, everyone. Whether it's good evening, good day, or good morning to you, it is fantastic to have you with us for this fireside chat with Peter Blom. So just so everybody knows who's on the call, yes, the invitation went out to all the CEOs of GABV, and as well as, I'll say, colleagues in the values-based banking world. And again, and so that's who's on the call today. Let's see, as we get started today, Peter, just a little heads up for you in terms of your position on this call. So we are going to take a little drive, a little Sunday drive, but atypical to the way things have been in the past. You get to be in the passenger seat and I get to drive the car this time. So hopefully you're happy about that. Because we're going to spend a bit of a time talking about you and your past and the history of the GABV. And so let me start out with just a little bit of a quote. And I'm sorry for those, I'll introduce myself. My name is David Reiling. I'm the CEO of Sunrise Banks and the new chair of the Global Alliance for Banking on Values, if I haven't met you before. And so, Peter, let's start out. Now as the former CEO of Triodos, and this was, I believe, a quote. Since its foundation in 1980, I've been a part of an exciting journey where Triodos Bank developed from a small Dutch banking initiative operating in a niche into a European values-based front-runner bank that we are today. Triodos was founded to finance the change in the economy, enabling finance for many sustainable businesses, projects, and initiatives. So, Peter, this kind of nicely sums up your work during your career, of which we're going to get into here in a moment. And I'd like to start with a little bit of a background in terms of your history, and maybe from the beginning, and one that I'm actually quite curious about. As I was researching your history, now, you have been a statutory member of the executive board of Triodos since 1989, and the CEO and chair of the board since 1997. It states here that in 1980, you started as a volunteer at Triodos, and then in 82 became one of its first business bankers. Take me back to 1980, and how did you become a volunteer for Triodos? What was it like then?
Oh, it was a very interesting time. I was studying economics in Amsterdam and running a small debate cafe in downtown Amsterdam with some friends, debating new political ideas, new ideas about the economy and the environment, all around 1980. So quite some time ago. And then we needed finance to acquire the building we were in. And no bank wanted to finance us. So I found out it was actually in 79, before the bank started. And then I found out there was a Triodos Foundation who is, well, brought together people who have some surplus money for good initiatives. So a little bit like a crowdfunding avant la lettre, I would say. Okay. And then I asked, well, I need 200,000 guilder to buy that building. Can you help us? And then the Triodos Foundation could help me with some private people providing money. And I was so enthusiastic about that initiative because I could see that that really would help many other businesses to who have no access to bank finance. So then I heard there was a possibility to join as a volunteer, and I came to them and to say, well, can I join? I'm only, I think 22 I was, so I've not much experience to bring, but I'm running this cafe and you granted me a loan, so there is something. So they did. So I was a very young volunteer there with a group of experienced people, lawyers, bankers, social activists, and I really enjoyed it. And then maybe that's not for everybody known. Then in the Netherlands, we still had a military service. And if you do not want to go into the military, you could do an alternative service, a civil service. Yep. And it was possible for me to do civil service in Triodos, in the Triodos Foundation. So I started as a civil service person. And then in 82, I was officially becoming an employee of the bank.
Oh,
So
very
it's
good.
all started. And then the bank started at 1980. We were only with 5 people, and I was sort of the business banking guy who had some experience with business, but not too much. But I really was helped by many others to acquire the skills you need for it.
Got it. So let's go on the Triodos journey. Let's just take that. Let's take the steps towards the CEO chair, and kind of walk us through it. So we're in '82. You're one of the first 5 employees. You're in the business banking sector. What's the next step for Peter in your career at Triodos?
I think I used the first years really to learn the banking skills. I was sort of economist, but that's not really. You learn a lot about finance and business. Well, theoretically you do, but not practically. So I learned a lot, and in the first challenge came for me around '86 when there was an 86, '87. There was the accident of Chernobyl, the big nuclear power plant, and that was really a trigger for many of our customers to say, what can we do to finance renewable energy? Oh. And that's the first time I really felt, now I have to act, I have to do something. So I went to Denmark and I went to the US to see how renewable energy, wind energy particularly, was sort of set up. So I went to Tehachapi in the US and to the many wind farms in Denmark So I developed the idea of a wind fund, and I created that wind fund. And that was for me quite an important entrepreneurial moment, I would say. It was not like a reactive banker, but more a banker who could see possibilities. And I really enjoyed that. It was 2 years before I became a statutory director and managing director.
Got it. And did you keep the cafe, or did you move along from that?
We moved along from that. We kept that fund, and we became a real important financier of renewable energy, and we still are actually in Europe. We have the most new projects every year we finance. Not the largest, because the largest is done by pension funds. And it became a very, very important, very profitable part of the business. Because we were there pretty early, and we developed very quickly a know-how basis. So that was a real learning for me.
So I mean, that's fantastic, and obviously that learning is probably shared amongst the people on this call. You had an opportunity, quite frankly, to be entrepreneurial. In a space to do well and to do good at the same time, and to really advance the bank forward. So take us to the next step. So we get into '86 and we're moving on. Obviously there's good success in the renewable energy space. What's the next step for you from a career in Triodos?
I think the next step was more in the early '90s when we did 2 things, actually. First of all, we were invited from Belgium and from the UK to open a branch. Oh. And we were only, I cannot imagine today, but we're only with 25 staff. And we got this invitation, and we had only 200 million guilder, so 100 million euro. And then we got 2 questions from Belgium. Can we open a branch? We did. We thought it was a great idea. The European legislation allowed us to do that, so we did. So we moved to the UK, to Bristol, where James later became one of the co-workers. And we moved to the city of Ghent in Belgium and opened a branch there. So that was the one thing. The other thing was that there was a lot of interest in investment funds. So we created the wind fund, but also an organic land bank fund, but also a microfinance fund. So the first ideas for microfinance were then emerging, and we felt we could really make it attractive for people to invest there. So the '90s for me was really about diversification, internationalization, and growing the bank sometimes with 50 to 100% a year in balance sheet. So quite a successful decade, so to speak, the '90s.
And what role were you playing at Triodos at that time in the 90s?
I was then already one of the two managing directors. That was at the end of '88. So I had a very good colleague, Paul Mackay, who took more care of the sort of relations with the Dutch Central Bank, shareholders, and I was really freed up to be the entrepreneurial banker and go out and create branches, create business.
Nice.
So I really felt very comfortable in being an entrepreneur banker, and then have to do not too quickly the managerial banking stuff.
Yep.
And I was still in my 30s, so you can imagine that it's the time you want to go out and do all sort of things you don't do when you're 50 or 60.
Right. No, that you can aspire to. That's fantastic. And then as we start to move into the 2000s, so now Triodos has maybe how many in staff and branches as we go into?
Well, at the moment, we have more than 1,500 in staff, and we are in 5 countries. As you know, we opened also in Spain and also in Germany. We had a little moment also started to try to start something in France, but we stopped that. It didn't work, so not everything works. It's also a good learning. And we have about the total funds are now 21 billion euro. What is 2/3, I would say a little bit more than 2/3, 75% bank, and the other part is investment funds.
Gotcha.
And that there we have become a middle-sized European bank. There are many very small banks, so you're a little bit more appreciated if you have this sort of size. And an important hurdle is 30 billion as a bank. Then you move to the significant bank category in Europe, where about 120 banks are in that category in Europe.
Got it.
But we are still in the slightly bigger middle-sized banks category in Europe.
Okay. So now let's go back to just before the Great Recession. So we're in 07. We got to paint a little picture there, because then we really start to hit the Great Recession and what happens then, and the thinking that starts to come out from there. So if you took us back to roughly 07, things are probably humming along, you're growing. Then what happens?
Well, what happened that in the years before the financial crisis, we got quite a few bankers from London to persuade us to develop all sort of products for the markets who are slightly related to renewable, and refuse to do that. I always said to them, if you not can explain what exactly is happening with risk and return, I'm not doing it. And I'm very grateful that we did it, because we got a great opportunity to become rich as management. And we felt that that's not the way forward. Then the financial crisis came, and interesting enough, many banks in Europe were under pressure, not trusted anymore. And we had to really had to manage the inflow of savings. We got sometimes hundreds of millions per day, what were offered to us on savings. And we couldn't use it because we were still a relatively small bank then. And they really were escaping the other banks who were not trusted anymore. One of the really big problematic banks was Fortis Bank at the time in Belgium. Sure. And we really got a lot of depositors coming to us. Interesting for us was that time that people signaled that Triodos was one of the few banks who were not in trouble because of all sort of financial instruments. So they asked us to explain what was the secret. And the secret was stay simple and stay true to your own mission and to your to the interest of your customers. Do not make it more fancy to earn more money. And that was very much appreciated. So we got quite a push, and then very well recognized by many people. Maybe this is the model for the future of banking. So now I'm talking about 2010, 2011. Yeah. And we became really, as a business model for banking, quite well known. That was also the time where we created the Global Alliance.
Yeah, no, I want to get there in just a minute. I want to just take one step back, because I think there are a few other things that I see in your past that kind of might have had some influence in terms of the Global Alliance. Now, talk to me about, you had I'll call it a brush with apartheid or an experience around it. What learnings kind of came out of South Africa for you?
But that was a much longer time ago. I was invited by the Canadian government in '86 to go on a secret mission to South Africa because it was still full apartheid there. Yeah. To work with an English colleague together and an Irish colleague to see how we could create community finance schemes in the townships. Okay. How they could, because the South African government didn't want those schemes there to be, and what could we do to do that in an informal way? That was. And some of the people who are familiar with that part of the world, you have these stokvelds, as they are called. It's an old Dutch name. And those stokvelds was sort of a form of finance where people every week put a little bit of money in a pot, and one of the participants, they got the whole pot and they could use it to make a business, and how to leverage on that. That's a sort of crowdfunding, internal crowdfunding. And I went there for the first time to South Africa. I came in as a tourist. That was the secret. And I had my other colleague came as a photographer, and we started to work in the townships with very interesting people from the townships to see what was possible. The advice was in the end not to come in with official money, because the official money would really put people in danger. And that was the people sat on the ground. But what I learned from that is that in a very, very distressed situation as apartheid, and what people have to go through, that you really have to listen careful to what the people themselves see as an opportunity and a possibility. And also listen if they say, don't help us with money and apartheid. That was basically the message they had. Then we can organize it. And interesting enough, and that was another experience in South Africa, when the apartheid was gone, there was this community bank. It was called Community Bank, what was created to support mainly Black businesses. Mm-hmm. And there we were one of the first, with our funds, one of the first shareholders to make that work. But that then was in the official, in the open, and that could function and work. So this comparison of the informal, what you can do in the informal world, and more formal, was for me very striking, and learned a lot from that, and got really interested in the whole microfinance question, and then learned about BRAC, learned about other microfinance institutions who were very successful then. And there we started to create these investment funds, and also to be on boards of microfinance banks and things like that. So it has been a whole new area where we have been working on as Triodos. For now, I think we are close to €1 billion what we have invested in that area. What is quite significant if you see that the amounts are relatively still small, what is invested per bank, and we are in about 100 banks altogether. Some of the banks of this group we are also invested in, as far as I know at the moment.
Very good. And in this type of investment, now you're the co-founder and former president of the International Association of Investors in the Social Economy. How does that tie into these investments?
That was an earlier initiative in Europe, and was trying to get more alliance between social finance organizations in Europe, not just banks. And we were very keen on getting this principle of social finance more into the picture of the European Union, and had very good relations with the European Union, got also some very good projects to cooperate. But the disadvantage was that it was very broad, so it was from very small NGOs to banks, and it was very hard to present it to the outside world as a cohesive organization. So we are still member, but it was one of the reasons to think about a real banking organization like the Global Alliance, to get more focus and more size as well, and more impact.
Got it. So there's just one more tangent I want to go on before I get to the GABV, and that is your connection in the Netherlands to organic food and organic shops and restaurants and information around that. How did you get into the organic food space?
Well, one of the things I did when I was much younger is to run an organic shop in parallel to my debate cafe.
Ah, gotcha.
So I myself was driving through the country, collecting the organic vegetables, bringing it to the shop, and actually selling them. So I've been a shopkeeper as well. Learn a lot from that.
Yes, you do.
How to maintain a good margin, how to do that in a good way. But I was quite successful as a shopkeeper, I must say. I really liked it as well. Not forever, but for a couple of years, you learn a lot.
Right.
So that's where I had a very strong relation with this movement. I could see how it came out of informality to more formal structures.
Got it.
And in the bank, we have financed quite a lot of very successful companies and became shareholder even of them. International trade companies who are in that area. So for me, the whole food system is quite it's not a healthy system, literally not healthy. It's owned, the whole global trade, by just a few big companies. And there are very many smallholders in different countries who are exploited, and many consumers who have not really access to where their food is coming from. So I feel the whole food system is an expression of an unsustainable system. And I feel that that we should more localize food, so people eat more local food. That would also be a very good measure against things like COVID. I mean, people don't want to hear it, but COVID is also a result of an unhealthy global food system, where you transport diseases, viruses all over. So to reduce that, I think, is important. It doesn't mean go back to the Middle Ages. I mean, you still have your ananas and your oranges, but maybe as a Dutch person, where are many apples and pears in the Netherlands, you do not import them anymore from Chile and from New Zealand,
Sure.
if you see what I mean. So there is a sort of logical thinking behind it, what I think we are learning the hard way at the moment, that we should look at that again. So that's why I'm very connected to this topic of organic food. And I feel, that the agriculture is one of the worst polluters at the moment in the world, particularly in the Netherlands. The Netherlands is very, very unhealthy. We bring all the feed for the cows to the Netherlands, the shit leaves in the Netherlands, and the meat is exported again. Oh. It's not a good situation. So I really hope that I can do, after I retire from the bank here, that I can do more work there, because it's really needed.
Nice. So you've laid a really great groundwork in terms of where we go next. I mean, the socially conscious, the environmentally conscious, the entrepreneurial Peter Blom in the development of Triodos at this time, in the growth of it and the success of it. And now we get, what I understand, we're beyond theoretically the beginning of the Great Recession, but the effects are still very much around us. Where does the idea come to say we really need to, as bankers, come together and begin to affect change? Where's the Global Alliance? What's the seed? Where's the moment there?
Yeah. Well, I feel, for me, I was also very much interested in other banks, mainly from the microfinance that already started in the 90s. And I was interested in other, concepts of banking. Yeah. Mary and I met far before with Shore Bank. So always very interested in what is the right sort of format for getting serving people more, democratizing capital in a way that people are more served than they serve money. Money serves them. That's basically the idea. And I feel that in smaller scale banks, you can start with that, then they grow. And how can you maintain this social inclusive focus strong in banking? And I was very inspired by many of your banks, actually, to see what was happening there and how you could do it in very different ways in different cultures, different countries. And the other question I was focused with, how can you realize scale? I mean, Triodos Bank, although it was growing still with 20-30% a year, I feel how long it will take before we really have scale. And then you can calculate that and you think, well, even when we continue to grow like this, in 20, 30 years, we are still a small bank or a middle-sized bank. So for me was the question, why would I go the same route as many other banks in the past and try to be as big as possible and get a little bit too much in the obesitas of banking, and how can we not relate on a network basis with other banks? And then I think the idea came particularly when we were sitting, and Mary gave that sketch on my farewell very nicely. How we're sitting together and saying, well, actually, we are a big bank, only we are not one bank, we are many banks. And we share these fantastic values. What I think, what struck me in the end when we created this global alliance for banking of values, that actually the values were much closer to each other than we had envisaged. So there was something we had in common, and it was related to the values. And I felt very encouraged by that. And then it started with only 9 banks. I think we thought, Louis Philippe is there on the call as well, we thought we had 10, but then the bank in Nicaragua suddenly was not there anymore. So we had to start with 9. And I think it was, there was a very good spirit right from the beginning, that this could be something new, and maybe bringing things together makes us having more impact, and we can learn from each other. So there was an internal enthusiasm, learning from each other, and an external possibility to create more impact. So and there it started.
So I just want to dive in a little bit deeper here, because so for those who don't know Mary Houghton, she was one of the original founders of South Shore Bank, which ultimately became Shore Bank of Chicago. A community development financial institution, a pioneer, if you will, in terms of social banking in the United States. But then there's another connection, as you were thinking, I think, about the board, if I recall. So Mary was a key player here, but then you had mentioned that you ran into BRAC in terms of microfinance in Africa. How did you connect with Fazil Abed, if I'm saying that correctly?
I think, Mary, we both knew him as an important mover and shaker, I would say, in the microfinance world. And also Fazil has this really international orientation. He's a global citizen. He's coming from Bangladesh, but has been everywhere, and everywhere he comes, he sees opportunities. And but he's based, of course, in Bangladesh with BRAC Bank. But he already explored many possibilities in other parts of the world to create something along the lines of BRAC, and did that very successfully. So we felt, if this is a real global alliance and not an alliance from the Northern Hemisphere, yep, then we need somebody like Fazil to support us. If he doesn't see the point, then why would we do it? So we had to chase him quite a lot before he said yes. You remember, Mary, it was not the first time he said yes. We really had to go after him. And I still remember it was in Zurich, I think, in Switzerland, on a conference where we again approached him. And then he said, yes, I think it's a great idea. And not many words, but since then he supported us wholeheartedly, and really said, this is important for the world. This is important for BRAC. Yep. So let's do it. And I'm very grateful that he did, because it helped us to create a global alliance where it was very easy to get something European, North American again. And there were many of that also. And really we felt it's time to have this global perspective. And I really am very proud of what we have been doing there, because if you look now, all the banks who are part of the Global Alliance, it's a real global banking movement. There are not many of them. So it was really helpful.
Fantastic. And so there's one more piece to this puzzle that I don't know if I remember this correctly. And so how, with Louis Philippe and getting someone from South America, or from the South particularly, again, in that global context, how did Louis Philippe come into the mix?
Well, Louis Philippe was invited with his bank on this first founding group. So we invited basically our friends. And
Okay,
we had
yeah.
through the microfinance connection, we had a couple of friends. We thought these are really mature banking institutions, finance institutions. Let's see if they are being able to join us in this. And so we need a strong group of founding members. And Louis Philippe showed up and became very enthusiastic in the first meeting. And then I dared to ask him, but if we look at sort of a board and we want to have a representation from Latin America, would you be willing to do that? And he said yes again. Yeah. And I would say the rest is history, but I think it was really a very good atmosphere in this founding group. There were really people who stood up, all the CEOs, and said, I want to be part of this. Yeah. And even when they were not part of the first board, they felt, no, this is important that we do this together. And that had a great impact on the growth, on the further growth of the organizations. And I'm still very sort of happy. So how much commitment there was from everybody to make this a success. So it was not owned by one bank or another bank. It was owned by, I could say, the founding group of banks, but very openly. So everybody wants to join, they could come in. So that was the success.
I do want to ask you, because I don't want to leave anybody who's critical out. Were there some other key people that, whether it's in Triodos or in other banks that were, especially in those early days, really instrumental in terms of the alliance, its growth, its kind of formation? Or
well, for me, it was very important that somebody like Thomas Jorberg from the GLS Bank, who I knew already for many years, stood up and said, I can see that you sort of will chair the whole group. I'm very happy to take care of Europe. Yeah. What was for me a sort of really support, because I thought if I do both, that's not very healthy. Sure. I can really focus then on the overall role I can play. Yep. So Thomas really helped there. And of course, from we had from the US, I think we had, I'm still trying to, Mary, of course, was there. Who else did Mary help me out? Who more was there in the first board? I'm not sure if we have Fazil was also there for a short time, but he was really busy with other things. So we had this Asian connection. Yeah. So we started to build.
Peter, I mainly think about Van City.
Yeah, that was a little bit later. That was not at the founding. Tamara came in when we had our first meeting in Peru, when we was hosted by the Bank of Louis Philippe. And then Van City came very quickly and took over also the position as a board member for the Northern America. Tamara did that. So there we built really a strong group of people, and then we had Ken LaRoe, who sort of represented the smaller institutions. He has been an enormous fan of the Global Alliance, and I hope his new bank will become a member again.
I'm sure he'll be on a path and a journry here.
Yeah, so that's fantastic. So all good friends, very good friends, and we felt it was a group of friends as well.
You know, I think it's important just to bring out, because in the early days of when Sunrise became a member in actually Van City's hosting in, I think, 2012 was the first time I was exposed. The support from, I'll say the larger institutions, but some of those founding institutions was very important for the Alliance. It was not only financial, but the leadership in the different parts of the world really made a difference, I think, to setting the right foundation and the understanding of the values, and how, while they can be expressed differently, the values are still really quite similar and shared. And so I do hold some great appreciation for those founding banks who really invested their time and money into the Alliance to make it, I think, what it is today. So that was very important.
Yeah, and that was not a difficult round. I mean, you would be surprised if you say, well, there was a deficit in the first years because we had to run a secretariat with not too many members.
Right.
And we didn't want to have this deficit. So we just shared among the banks the bill.
Right.
And it was not a real big thing. Everybody was happy to contribute to that. And I'm still grateful for all my colleagues that they were doing that. So it felt really like we share this together. It's not somebody asking the others to do it. It's something we felt this is important for everybody. And now it has become under actually Marco's leadership. It became a healthy financial organization and it can take care of its own costs. Well, it's also good, I think.
Yep.
But you need, and everybody knows from a starting bank or an initiative, you need some support in the first years from some partners who have a little bit surplus money available to do that. Otherwise, you can't get going.
Yeah, it really gives you that traction. And, you know, I would kind of personally, and maybe on behalf of the Alliance, thank the employees of Triodos who also leaned in a lot in terms of the organization in many different ways. And there were several people from several different banks that took different turns of leading communities of practice and so forth. But Triodos gave space. There was obviously a lot of behind the scenes there. So for your colleagues from Triodos who are on the line, we heartfelt appreciate your efforts to get us to this point.
Thank you. I will pass it on. No, there has been a lot of enthusiasm, and James is one of the examples, I think. He was very keen on being involved very quickly. He got the spark from the Global Alliance and did a lot. And now he's working for it. So you see it, that's how it goes.
That's perfect. Yep. Now I'm just going to remind the people on the call that if you have questions, feel free to put some in the chat for Peter. We'll open this up just a little bit here in the kind of the last 20 minutes we have. But Peter, I just want to walk through just a couple more things on your career that I think are quite interesting. You're a member of the board of the Dutch Banking Association, co-founder and co-chair of the board of Sustainable Finance Lab, a chair of the supervisory board of MVO Netherlands, a full member of the Club of Rome, a member of the Central Planning Committee of the Netherlands, in the Bureau of Economic Policy Analysis. I would go back to say, and you were awarded the Dutch Royal Distinction of Knight of Oranje Nassau. Yeah, if I pronounce that right, in 2008 for your contribution to social banking and sustainability. So quite more than an illustrious career, a very successful one. And now your role will continue beginning in September of this year. You've been appointed to the supervisory board of the Dutch Central Bank. And so maybe let's just start there for a second. The role of central banks in values-based banking. Do you have insights there? And I know in our previous conversation, you talked about metrics that matter, but the central banks, each member on this call has ultimately a central bank to report to as a regulator, if you will. The role of central banks in values-based banking. Any thoughts there?
Well, I think we have our sort of multiple relations with central banks, I would say. Also, mine has not always been easy because sometimes central banks can be quite sort of, thinking that they know how banking works and tell you what to do. But in the end, it's you as a banker have to decide what you want to do. So there is an unhealthy tension. On the other side, after the financial crisis, I felt that the role of central banks, the supervisory part, has really had to be renewed and has to be more adequate than it was in the past. It was a little bit the old boys, literally boys network, and that had to change also in Europe, and it did. What I liked about the Dutch Central Bank, and some of you may remember, one of the directors came to speak at our event, GABV event in Zeist in, I think it was 2000, probably 15 or 16, Frank Alderson, who made very clear that climate change is part of the system risk central banks should look into. And climate risk is not just the climate as such, but including the social dimension. And he has become very vocal about it, and recently actually appointed in the ECB board to make that a broader European thing. And what I liked about his approach, that he no longer thought that finance was isolated from all this question, but really have to see in this broader context. Mm-hmm. And that maybe you should think about if banks bank greener, that they should have a lower capital requirements, or the other way around. If you have too many brown assets, you should maybe be more holding more capital against it. That sort of ideas we have sort of worked with him together on, and starting to become real measures now of central bank. He started this alliance or association of central banks greening the economy. I think they have about 70 central banks now who are a member of that. And I think it's a real partner for the GABV to see how we can do things together. And I feel, I still remember we had this conversation with the regulator in Australia when we had our annual conference of the GABV, of then what it was called now Bank Australia, then Bank MECU. Yep. And for them it was pretty new, and they were interesting to hear that central banks going that route, and also the Global Alliance has this aspect of value-based banking. So what I hope that in banks and regulators, central banks can more work together on this. And the third party is really government. The European Union is doing a lot, but also in other parts of the world that's happening. In Europe, you have the European Green Deal, and I really feel that can also help our type of banking on the environmental side to move forward. And interesting enough, today, it's not only about the environment, social inclusion comes immediately into the picture as well. You cannot do environmental banking without social inclusion, I would say. So that's an interesting new step. And I hope, and I've been asked also for that reason, to come to the supervisory board, not only as the banker with experience on what a regulator does to banks, but also on this dimension. So I hope that I can contribute to that.
Yeah, and that would be a fantastic connection, because I really do see the GABV as an alliance of action. And so obviously what we have going on the PCAF side and looking at our carbon accounting, as well as on the social metrics side, I think there's a day where there's an intersection of both of those two pieces of bodies of work. But also, how do we then integrate that, or at least test it, or provide regulators and central banks with a framework that's been tested in a real life environment to give them the confidence to make policy really or make regulations. Yeah.
And that really starts to support value-based banking, not sort of out of an ideological perspective, but purely because it's less risk.
Right.
And I think the less risk, that really has worked in favor of us. When they always said, yeah, but that's your political agenda. I said, no, it's about risk. You have to look from a system risk to environmental and social questions. And then you will see that this is stabilizing this sort of banking, all sort of risk who are now in the system. And step by step, slowly, also the ECB starts to pick this up. And I think we are on a good path.
Very good. So I have a question from the audience relative to transformational initiatives, but really I would like to boil it down to say, as you look back, if you had to give advice to somebody in their 20s, so I'll take you back to maybe the cafe and the coffee shop a little and volunteering for Triodos, and again, out of that spirit of service, but what is there advice, or is there thoughts there in terms of how sustainable finance and initiatives connect with a younger generation?
I think it connects a lot. We can see a lot of younger people wanting to be part of it. And what is interesting, that they have much more. They are much more sensitive to the technology side of it. And what I mean by that, with all the apps and all the insights you can provide now on what is happening with your money and what your money what the impact of your money is. Even ABN AMRO has a fantastic impact tool now for their customers. Yeah. I think the younger generation wants a technological savvy approach to what is happening with their money. And what you see, and that's an old sort of motto for me, the more you allow them to have interest in what they can achieve with their money, the lower the interest rates will be. Sure. So there is a sort of balancing factor in there, that if you allow people to be more connected to other people, to business, that they are inspired by it, they can see they can participate in what is happening, and they also see what is sometimes needed in more soft money, and that can all be much more easily allowed by technology, and without the technology cannot reach the younger generation. So the younger generation is very open to this idea, but it has to be done in a modernized way. That's our experience here. And I think there's also a great opportunity for the Global Alliance, I feel, to connect those two. You are well positioned to say something about it, David. So you are, I think, ahead of many of us with those ideas. But I think technology can really help us there. But not technology for the technology, but it does serve the new generation to connect to what is important to them.
Yep. And I think the GABV and values-based banking really has an advantage in that space, because technology can do so many things, but it's really the transparency and the authenticity of those values and where the money is at the end of the day to where the values really shine. And that's the connection I think that's ultimately made.
Yeah. No, there's also this really desire for authenticity. If it's just fake, then people feel, well, that is particularly also with social media quite a challenge nowadays. What is real, what's not real, but there who's behind it and who can be trusted. And I think the ethics of Global Alliance banks are very important in that. We are trusted banks, and we should be live up to that position we have. And also as a Global Alliance, we should really be aware of that. But being trusted is quite important to be able to be interesting for younger generations. It cannot be fake. It has to be authentic.
Well, we're on the topic of authenticity. So another question is, with big capital market players starting to promote impact instruments, green instruments, etc., how can organizations like the GABV help keep this momentum in the right direction and avoid being used for greenwashing or worse?
Yeah, you see some very interesting developments there. One of them is the green taxonomy, or the social inclusive taxonomy, what has been developed. There's a big debate in Europe, in the European Union. For now, there is a first version of the taxonomy, what helps to avoid greenwashing. I think there's still a debate if nuclear and natural gas are under green or not. For the time being, they are excluded from it, but it could change again. And you see it's highly politically topical, so it's many forces are there to make a lot of things look green or actually not green. The next step is that many investment funds, pension funds will provide a discount on their interest rates if it's officially according to the taxonomy green or social. So that's an important development where we as Global Alliance banks can be proud of. So it's first investment funds, but it will also come to the banks. That is already in the worldwide happening. I think we can sort of use that as a sort of foundation where we build our own additional values on. So I think, and that is a little bit of a challenge for us. Some of us have to really take measures to meet the criteria of the modern taxonomy. And then in addition to that have to make clear what the unique contribution is of that bank. And I think that goes much more in the direction of showing the connection between social inclusion and climate change, for example, to provide much more information, interactive communication about values of certain businesses people want to invest in. That's all not in the taxonomy. That's quite static. And I think a more dynamic approach, an interaction approach, is something what many big banks can never do, and we can do, and develop that from the ground. And I think there's a real opportunity for us. So combine what's there as a more sensitized, basic idea that green has to be solid and authentic to what we can do on top of that. So I see really opportunities there.
So I have a question for you, and it's around maybe the pool of values-based banks that are out there in the universe. So we have 66-ish banks in the alliance today. Have we gotten all the easy ones? Is it time that we have to now teach and inspire others to come on the journey with us? How do you look at that from a membership standpoint?
I think that would be great. I think there is a whole category of banks. I would say the smaller significant banks. I'm wondering if the real big ones are not too much, while they're almost government organizations, I would say. They are so regulated. There's such a big risk for governments that they do other things than they do at the moment. But there is quite a big group of middle-sized banks, I would say between maybe 10 billion to 50 billion balance sheet in euros or dollars, where you feel there is still enough flexibility to and also need to position themselves in a not easy market. Banking markets are not easy markets. That I feel we can help them by maybe an associative membership first, and then maybe develop it further to a full membership. But I really feel there is a need and an opportunity for this category of banks to profile themselves more, because in many ways they cannot compete with the big banks. So they can just keep up with the standards, but they have to do something extra. And from the fact that they are not too big and too not, difficult to steer, you can make use of that. And I think there will be a real next category where we can work with. And now I'm talking about 10 to 50 billion is mid-size, small, big for the Northern Hemisphere, but I feel in the South, in many emerging markets, maybe there it's more close to 10 billion, 15 billion, and are already quite significant banks there. But the whole idea is that there is enough space and opportunity to be different from what the rest of the market does, and we can really play a role there.
Yeah, and it's interesting in that kind of definition around scale. We talk a lot about the social and environmental impact and the connectivity between them. But at the end of the day, I think everyone on this call who runs a regulated financial institution is acutely aware that financial sustainability of the business itself is, obviously it's mandatory in a regulatory environment, and it's necessary to do some of the investments that a values-based bank wants to do in terms of its community or its type of lending. And so it is size and sustainability is also a factor, I think, in what makes a good member. Now, there's a journey to that, but obviously there's a size on the small and then on the large size, which there might be a sweet spot in between.
Yeah, and maybe we have not even come at all to a situation where we make better use of the scale we have as an organization, as an alliance. I mean, we're still quite separate banks doing on a shared value, I would say, our work, but I still wonder if we could not go into a next phase to say, well, there are some basic products who are not so different in a certain region, and why don't we develop them together? Maybe give our own little extra flavor, but actually not reinventing the wheel all the time again.
Correct.
And I think in Europe, we are looking into that with our colleagues of the Global Alliance banks. What can we share more? We start with the investment funds.
Yep.
Can we offer the investment funds of each organization on each other platforms? Was the first start. But I can imagine, so we are going to offer Banca Etica investment funds and GLS investment funds in Spain in our office there. Nice. So that's a first start. Very, very, not very risky, but it helps to think about where am I unique and where can I really be unique together with my colleagues.
Yes.
And we have to overcome the idea that we everything have to do ourselves. The other thing is I would not, and I can now say it more easily, although I'm still in office for 4 weeks, so I have to be careful, that some mergers, I think, between Global Alliance members might also help to get really more advantage of scale. But that's always a very mergers. 75% of all the mergers are not creating extra value. You have to be very sure that it is working. But I can imagine that that's another way of looking at it. And then we get more used to each other and trust each other. We can build on that. So there's a lot of things we can do with the Global Alliance. I'm quite convinced.
Nice. So Peter, we're just near the top of the hour here, but I want to give you the final say, if you will, in terms of any final words or comments or advice to those on the call today.
Well, you are my friends, and I really, really like the working with you, and I hope I can continue to work with you. I have a lot of contacts with some of you, and in one way or the other, I hope that I can contribute to the development of the alliance. Particularly, I see an important role for the alliance to strengthen the governance of, to help to become the governance of banks stronger. And what I mean by that, board education, senior management education. I'm very interested in helping there. Talking to Marcos about it as well, how we can do that. So you will hear more from us. Because I feel that this all is people work. It's one thing to have a good CEO. It starts with a good CEO and a good team. But it's also how that CEO is supported by her or his board. How does he organize the bank in a way that people are included in the whole thing? I think there's still a lot of things to learn from each other and to be shared. Because it is about that sort of that sort of constellation in a bank, what makes it successful or not. Yeah. And I feel we can do more there as well. And I'm very happy to help there if that is possible and needed. So I will stay in touch.
Fantastic. Well, I'm sure you will be welcome, or it'll be a welcome phone call to take. Well, Peter, thank you so much for taking the time today. We really appreciate all your thoughts and insights and sharing with us. Yeah. Of course, this is not goodbye. It's just until we meet again. But thank you for taking this time. Thanks for everyone on the call for making time and space today. We appreciate it. Have yourself a wonderful day or evening, depending on where you are. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye now.